great pleasure now to introduce Patrick Boylan, who's going to talk about Leicester in times past and present. He's going to do some readings. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you. Wasn't that wonderful? And I feel much more comfortable. I thought the idea of going on and doing my little 10 minutes after the first half was pretty terrifying, but after that wonderful performance, I feel slightly more comfortable. Leicester has, the great news about Leicester is it is actually the oldest or second oldest, joint oldest possibly, city in Britain. Founded before the Romans came. It shares that with Colchester. The less good news is that the high point of Leicester in terms of its national and indeed international importance was just about 650 years ago. So we've been going downhill slightly since then. But where did it all come from? And I think a story which will be familiar from seeing Shakespeare at least and so on, is where the name came from. And what happened was, why is it Leicester? And various legends and a lot of actual inventions, I think, total fiction almost, were put together by a Welsh scholar writing in Latin in about 1180, Geoffrey of Monmouth. And his history of the kings of Britain was very widely spread around in manuscript and so on, and it was then translated and elaborated in the history of Britain by Hollinshead at the beginning of the Tudor period, and it was Hollinshead's version of Geoffrey of Monmouth which gave us the story of the origins of our town. So I'll start with just a few extracts from that. When Bladon was thus given over to his destinies, his son Lear was next raised to the kingdom, and ruled the country after a manly fashion for 80 years. It was he that built the city on the river Soar, that in British is called Caerlear, but in the Saxon Leicester. Male issue was denied to him, his only children being 3 daughters named Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia, which he loved all equally, but most of all the youngest, Cordelia. When he was, as one of you put it, on the verge of old, he decided he would divide his kingdom into 3, between the 3 daughters. And he then went through asking them how they loved him and so on. Goneril and Regan came up, just to paraphrase, they came up with very flattering, extraordinary things, which pleased him. When he asked Cordelia, she said that she loved him as she ought to love her father, and didn't need to go into all this terrible exaggeration. Lear misunderstood this and decided that Cordelia didn't love him properly, and so he split the kingdom 3 ways, kept 1/3 himself, and gave the other 2 to the older daughters, to Goneril and Regan. Cordelia was disinherited because he intended that the 3rd he would rule himself would then be divided between these 2 daughters. They married, and Cordelia was left, and was eventually the king, a French king, asked if he could have her hand in marriage. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth and Hollinshead, this happened about 800 BC. But if it happened at all, it was probably nearer to 100 BC, but never mind. However, the 2 older daughters and their husbands turned on Lear, they mistreated him, they were fought against him, they captured his land, and they disinherited him and eventually forced him to exile, accompanied with just one knight. The old man was completely devastated by all of this and wondered what on earth he could do. And he finally decided that he would go to try and make his peace with his youngest daughter, Cordelia. And he went to France. Landing at last, his mind filled with these reflections, and he came to Caritia, where his daughter lived, and waiting outside the city, sent a messenger to tell her what had happened to him, and to beseech his daughter's compassion, as he had neither food nor clothing. On hearing the tidings, Cordelia was much moved and wept bitterly. When she asked how many armed men he had, and was told he had just one knight, she took as much money and silver as needed and gave it to the messenger, telling him to take her father to another city where he should bathe, clothe and nurse him, feigning that he was bringing him back to health. She also commanded that a retinue of 40 knights should then announce his arrival to her husband and herself. They did all that, and eventually the French king was so outraged that he launched a conquest and overthrew Goneril and Regan and their husbands. And they enabled Lear to re-establish his control of the kingdom for his father-in-law, King Lear. And Holinshead continues. When they had made all ready, Lear led the assembled host and his daughter into Britain, fought a battle with his sons-in-law, and won the victory, bringing them all under his own dominion. In the 3rd year thereafter, he died, and Agrippinus died and Cornelia was now the mistress of the state of Britain. She buried her father in a certain underground chamber which he had bidden to be made under the River Soar at Leicester. Leicester was very much a merchant centre. It was very powerful, and it did not like strangers. Strangers were people who came from places like Melton Mowbray or Uppingham. Foreigners were people who came from places like Nottingham and Northampton. And a lot of this was linked to protecting the trade. And it was a grave of only freemen, burgesses of the town, were allowed to do any trade within the town, and they could only bring in goods from outside if they paid customs duty on it, and so on. And in 1316, there were 2 cases brought on the same day, in September the 3rd, in which related to 2 people. One had brought in woad, the dye, which wasn't just worn by naked ancient Britons. It was a very popular, very important colour for producing blue cloth right through until the modern synthetic stuff had developed. And another one had brought in canvas on behalf of a merchant in Northampton. And it's the account of the record recorded in the borough records. Leicester has probably some of the best, most complete in the country, actually. Will Bate was charged before the mayor and the other jurats of the community that he sold woad from a certain stranger by small and large amounts, who came and he confessed and pledged £10. Afterwards, he made fine of 3 shillings and 4pence to pay now, and he confessed that he had 4 quarters of woad, which were arrested, in other words, seized by the town. They were valued at £6, and they were kept by the town. The second was Godfrey of Louvain, Leicester resident, actually, Leicester freeman, although he'd been obviously come from Flanders, from Louvain. He was charged that he sold canvas belonging to Hugh Middleton of Northampton, against the rights of the local traders, the guild. And he came in and confessed that he sold this to the merchants of the town, and so was convicted and pledged £10. Afterwards he made a fine of £1 to pay, and one bale belonging to the said who was arrested, seized by the council in the hand of the said Godfrey, who also was fined £1. I said that the most important time in Leicester history was the middle of, it was 650 years ago, the middle of the 1300s, when Leicester was a powerful centre of first the Earls and then the Dukes of Lancaster and Leicester. The first Duke created one of the greatest musical establishments in the whole of England, the Choral College of the Newark, which sadly was almost completely disappeared. The De Montfort University now occupies most of the site, but some fragments of it survive. The son of the first Duke, the second Duke, was John of Gaunt. Gaunt because he was born in what England called Gaunt or Ghent. So he was another incomer, but he was regarded as the richest man in the world. Current estimates suggest that at present prices, he would have been worth around £130 billion. So not bad going. And he subsequently had 3 sons, all of whom were kings. Henry IV, Henry V, and Henry VI. He, of course, is recognised by Shakespeare in Richard III, and Shakespeare puts in his mouth one of the most famous speeches describing England, the realm of England. This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden, demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself, against infection and the hand of war, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in a silver sea, which serves in it the office of a wall, or a moat defensive to a house against the envy of less happy lands. This blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England, this nurse, this teeming womb of royal kings, feared by their breed and famous by their birth, renowned for their deeds as far from home, for Christian service and true chivalry. Well, I mentioned Henry V, and one of the astonishing discoveries of the last few months, literally, revealed first of all just last Thursday, is that I've discovered that within the most important musical manuscript, English musical manuscript of the 14th century, the so-called Selden Carol book, which is in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, which has 18 original manuscripts, beautiful scores and so on, and dates from about 1425. It has been Oxford since the 1470s, and a number of people have suggested that there was a possible link back to the Newark College. And what I've suddenly spotted, having read these texts many times, is there is a superb pun buried in the text, which makes it clear they're talking about the New Walk. And if this is the source, I better finish with this, with one of the most famous medieval songs of England, the Agincourt Carol, celebrating the victory of Henry V against all the odds in 1415. And as I said, the manuscript probably no later than 1425, and it is the earliest manuscript source of this. If I'd known that we're going to have 3 wonderful a cappella singers here this evening, I would have brought the musical on because it's written for 3 parts, and I would have asked them to sing it. But I will just read a couple of verses because I know we're getting short of time. The chorus is Deo gratias Anglia, Rede cor Victoria. Give thanks to God, England, for the great victory. Our king went forth to Normandy with grace and might of chivalry. There God for him wrought marvellously, wherefore England may call and cry, Deo gratias. He set siege, forsook to say, to Harfleur town with Ryle away. That tune he won and made a fray, that France shall read till doomsday. Then went him forth our king comely, in Agincourt field he fought manly. Through grace of God most marvellously, he had both field and victory. Deo gratias. The lords, earls and barons were slain and taken, and that full soon. And some were brought into London, with joy and bliss and great renown. Almighty God, he kept our king, his people and all his well-willing, and gave them grace without ending, that then may we call and safely sing, Deo gratias, thanks be to God. Thank you.